Platoon! God, I'm not looking forward to this. Yeah. So on the bottom, you could probably tell, yeah, another hit. As you probably tell, the bottom left is where your ammo is, you know, and you got quite a bit of ammo actually. Then you got your score and you got your morale. And I'm assuming the yellow part, I'm assuming you're in high morale right now. Which is inaccurate because my morale is sort of shit. At the moment. In fact, my morale is shit whenever I play the game. I guess that's intended. Oh, motherfucker. I tossed that. Yeah. I'm dead. Man, fuck this game, man. This game sucks. I want to play something else.
Released in 1988 by Sunsoft for the Nintendo Entertainment System and based on the 1986 motion picture of the same name. You know, the one about American soldiers in Vietnam during a pretty significant historical conflict and rooted in some semblance of reality that is totally lost in translation to video game form because this is, after all, licensed game schlock from the 1980s. And here's a bit of fun trivia some people might not be aware of. Platoon is a game developed by Ocean Software initially on the various home computer formats at the time the year prior, and then Sunsoft eventually got the rights to port the game over to the NES, which does explain the overall format of the game. See, Platoon doesn't just stick with one style of play, but rather it is divided up into various styles of play. That was something often done with a lot of these older computer titles, especially those based on various properties. They'd give you different styles of play that cover different parts of the property they adapt. The results are often mixed, but since there was an audience for that stuff, the format stuck around, and there was a thriving gaming community on the home computer front, because those poor sods clearly didn't know any better. Platoon naturally followed that format on the NES when it was ported, and the results, as you can imagine, are mixed. Level 1 is a rather slow-paced, side-scrolling game that has you controlling generic soldier dude. I think it's supposed to be the main protagonist, Chris Taylor, as played by Charlie Sheen in the movie, but there's no indication of that in-game. So your main deal here is that you're navigating this forest maze, avoiding tripwires and enemy ambushes, and your main goal is to seek out explosives to bomb a bridge. Easier said than done because this forest is a massive maze with multiple parallel paths that all look the same save for some bits and pieces here and there, and interactive elements spawning troops and tripwires are randomly generated each time you traverse a path. And this could lead to wonderful scenarios such as hidden troops behind bushes or tripwires placed to prevent people from running into this impassable tree bark. Brilliant. Right off the bat, Platoon has some problems, starting with control, which are awkward. B button shoots your gun, no problem there. A button tosses a grenade, and to jump, you press up on the D-pad. And while you're airborne, you cannot shoot. So every jump is a calculated risk because enemies can and will spawn out of nowhere to strike at inopportune times. They can drop in from above, they can rush in from behind, or go for a classic frontal assault. Some enemies will emerge from the ground to fire off the shot, and they're just low enough that not even a crouching shot can catch them. Not only that, but you also have openings that will lead you to other parallel paths in the forest that you could take by pressing up or down, but only if you're on that sweet spot where such an action can be registered, because otherwise... Your soldier dude can take up to 4 hits before he becomes a casualty of war, but tripping over a wire will kill you instantly. And nothing says pure joy like the double whammy of running into an airborne enemy only to fall on top of a tripwire where you're one step away from instant death. The game gives you 5 tries to make it through the jungle, and once they're exhausted, it's game over. Sometimes enemies will drop provisions that will restore 1 hit point and maybe give you a little extra ammo, which is also limited. Your main and really only weapon of note in Platoon is your machine gun, which can be shot left or right and only while grounded. You do have grenades that can clear the screen of enemies, but it takes about a second or two to toss a grenade, and during this time, you are completely immobile and thus vulnerable to enemy attack. This alone makes the grenade an utterly useless weapon in the field, and even so, you only ever have one enemy on screen at a time anyway, so you're better off just shooting the bastard and moving right along. The jungle/forest is a long, tedious maze not helped by your slow speed, awkward controls, and the random nature of spawning enemies and traps. It is the breaking point for most players, who will mostly fumble about this first level and not even come close to finding the bombs needed to blow up the bridge, let alone reach the village on the other end. But once you do reach the village, it's not over yet, because now you have to search the huts for a torch, a map of the underground tunnel system, and the entrance to said tunnel system. And you need to find the map and torch to even access the next level. Oh, and some of these huts are booby-trapped and will kill you. In addition, you also have to watch for civilians, who are harmless, but shooting them will reduce your morale meter, and once your morale meter is empty, the game ends no matter how many lives you have left over. This is the closest the game gets to touching on the morality aspect of the movie's plot, and it's also the only time morale plays any major role in the overall game. Once you get the torch in the map, you can now access the second level and put this horrendous jungle maze behind you. From here on out, Platoon's remaining segments are significantly less irritating and nowhere near as frustrating. Unfortunately, that's about the only good news you could expect from here on out, because things do get worse in some other ways. Level 2 has you navigating a tunnel system to seek out a way closer to the enemy encampment. This is done in a first-person adventure-type setup with your view on the left and a map of the tunnel on the right, which is all conveniently laid out for you. Every so often, an enemy will emerge and you have seconds before they strike you. Again, 4 hits is enough to do you in, but if you have another platoon member active, you get to try again. Your main goal here is to find a compass, secret documents, and flares before making your way to the exit, each of which are found in rooms scattered throughout the system. Also hidden in some of these rooms are medical supplies and ammunition to restore your wares, which prove to be vital since encounters are random here, and quick reflexes are required in order to endure, much less survive, these dreaded sewers. The tunnel system is slightly more manageable than the first level's jungle, and also fairly straightforward. Moving about the tunnel is easy enough since you have an arrow that keeps track of your general position on the map and everything is conveniently laid out before you, all but the locations of items in the various rooms, but even this is fairly easy to figure out with some exploration, and none of the item locations are ever randomized, so it's mostly about getting the goods and getting the fuck out of this hellhole as quickly as possible with your skin intact. Enemies pop out of nowhere and without warning. You can't move on until you defeat the enemy. Sometimes after damaging you, the enemy may flee, but they can also go for another blow. And while control over the targeting reticule is somewhat slippery when you need to use it, it is manageable. Once you know where everything is, level 2 shouldn't take too long to clear out and has a stark contrast in difficulty and complexity compared to the opening forest level. Honestly, I'm almost tempted to call this the best part of the game, and probably would have preferred if the whole game had been like this, with a bit of tweaking of course. If nothing else for the sake of having different scenery to venture through in this mode. Unfortunately, we still have 2 more segments to get through, and neither of them are particularly inspired. Level 3 is a shooting gallery in pitch black where you reside in a foxhole fending off against an onslaught of enemy troops. Basically, you seek out the emerging enemy in the darkness and shoot them before they shoot you. If you have a flare, you could use that to light the way, but if you pay enough attention, you could actually make out the enemy shadows in the massive darkness. It's a tedious and dull experience, but it also happens to be the easiest segment in the game, and once you off a number of soldiers, it's off to the final level/mini game thing. And I suppose I could take some time to comment on the overall presentation, which, for what it's worth, isn't too bad. I like the opening title screen with the somewhat somber title music. They could have gone for something more uplifting or more exciting, like a video game music titles thing, but that would have gone against the tone of the film this is adapting, and this ain't too bad actually. The forest is actually quite detailed in foliage and scenery, not necessarily varied until you reach the horizon in the village, and some of the foreground elements can fuck you over in hiding traps from plain sight, resulting in some cheap deaths, but otherwise it looks fine. The tunnels and the dugout segments are decidedly less inspired visually. The enemy emerging from the water gives off a bit of a scare despite making no noise, but trudging along these bright red caves kills off whatever move you're trying to convey here. And then there's the final level, which looks decidedly average, but we'll get to that in a little bit. On the flip side, the audio starts off strong and then falls off a cliff. Like I said, there's a great title theme, and even the forest theme in the first level is a rather catchy little jingle, though some might tire of it after playing the same level over and over and over again, and that's understandable. Some of the later tracks, however, come across as hokey and lame. They try to go for a tense feeling, but it doesn't quite work, and just ends up sounding pretty bad and not great. Sound effects are okay, stock sounding explosions and such for NES fare. Not much else to say there, but anyway, I digress. So once you clear the set number of enemies from the dugout, it's off to the final segment of the game, which is a single screen overhead shooting thing. You have a guy shooting on top, you shoot him, another takes his place, and after 4 or 5 enemies shot, the coast is clear, you avoid the pitfalls, mines, and sniper shots to reach the top of the screen, and either take the left or right path, because much like the first level, we've got another jungle maze to navigate, and it's just as tedious and dull. Although on the upside, control is simple and responsive. You move with the D-pad, you shoot upwards with the B button, pretty difficult to mess up. Anyway, your goal is to find the final boss in this maze, you kill him, and then the game ends. And after all of that, if you're hoping for some kind of inspirational, soul-searching, inner character development after enduring such a harrowing experience for the ages, well, this game only has one thing to say to you.
What?
Platoon is a misfire on the NES, an example of something that might have worked on the home computer front, but not quite translating to the home console format. Mind you, trying to make a game out of a movie tackling a serious subject matter in a serious fashion is always going to be a tricky proposition, since whatever message the movie had to say becomes an afterthought as a result. Platoon isn't just another schlocky action film like a Rambo or a Commando, but schlock is what Ocean turned Platoon into in video game form. A meanderingly convoluted and irritating side-scrolling forest maze that only a few people will have the patience to sit through, a simplified and somewhat tedious first-person adventure setup that is quite honestly the only worthwhile part of the package, even in its untapped state, and a bunch of other stuff that feels like it was just tossed in there with no rhyme or reason so we could call it a day. And then this is what Sunsoft decided to port over to the NES, which, gee, I don't know, this came out in like, what, 1988? Yeah, soldier guys running and gunning in a jungle setting against an onslaught of enemy troops. Well, golly willikers, if I were a kid who had a Nintendo Entertainment System back in the day, oh wait, I was. Which game would I be more likely to go for? The one with the 2 commando guys and an alien on the cover, or the one with a guy getting shot in the back and wailing in agony? Different platforms breed different audiences, especially back in the day. Subject matter and anything else of that nature aside, Platoon might have been fine as a home computer game whose audience may have skewed slightly older, but on a platform with a slightly younger audience and a library of games that were more approachable and generally more exciting and more enjoyable as a result, Platoon doesn't quite hit that mark. That first level may be a breaking point for most players, but honestly, what laid beyond that point isn't any better. And now that we've concluded this piece of business, I hereby dishonorably discharge this game from my brain and will therefore see myself to bed. Good night.